We don't need studio mode anymore. We're here and we're having fun. We're live, baby. We're back after a little longer than we had initially expected, I'll admit.
Yeah, after 2 weeks, we are back, and once again, that's my fault. Hello, my name is Tigereyes45, and I'm a college student. That means my schedule is not my own.
Hey, it's Noah in the editing studio, and I just wanted to say, I know what you're thinking. 2 weeks? It's been like 9 months since a new episode came out. And no, it hasn't. It's been 2 weeks. Don't worry about it.
And I am not a college student. Honestly, I have no excuse for any delays that happen. Yeah, I'm gonna put that. Let's pretend it was me. Let's say it was me. You know, it was me. I blew it. It was all on me, people. That's why the schedule is so fuzzy. Certainly, if you've been waiting for episodes to come out regularly in like the audio podcast only form, those delays are entirely my fault. I'm working on it. I'm trying out a new schedule that might actually make a bit more sense. But I wouldn't get, I don't count on it. Don't count on it. I am the newbie this week after all. Wait, no, I'm not the newbie. I'm the host. Why am I supposed to be being the newbie? I'm only the newbie literally half the time. I'm the host because I read this book when I was a child.
For once,
when my dad handed it to me. We both have the same edition, it appears. I didn't know this until now. I'm so glad we both have the same edition of the subject of today's episode, Anne McCaffrey's Dragondrums, the grand finale of the Harper Hall trilogy, which is a parallel trilogy of books coming out along with the first kind of main 3 books in the Dragon Riders of Pern series. For further context on all that, see the first 2 episodes, and then also see the Dragon Riders of Pern wiki, because dang, do we not get into all of it in this little mini series of ours.
Oh, we absolutely do not.
We do not. You finally dove into the wiki for the first time.
I did. I literally had to for this book.
I'm so glad you did. Honestly, you probably have a fresher and cleaner knowledge of Pern than I do, because again, I only know like some of the books that came out in like the 70s and 80s. You've probably got stuff going all the way down to like Dragonheart and other of the like more recent books.
Okay, so I was so scared about spoiling things for myself in case we decided to do the other books for the podcast. I actually kept it just to this trilogy.
Oh, really? Good for you.
Just in this trilogy and the things that people were doing in this trilogy and then the broader politics to help me make sense of it all. I did not read too deeply into anything because I was so scared of spoiling the shit.
I'm guessing that was more than
50
enough.
Years old. Holy shit, this book is nearly 50 years old because the third one came out in 1977.
Dang.
Damn.
Wait.
It is 44 years old.
Wait, mine says 79. There must have been an earlier edition. My goodness.
Oh, you're right. 79. I think the second one came out in 77.
It is as old as Empire, which is to say, old.
I can't tell if you're talking about Star Wars Empire or just like empires themselves.
Empires as a historical concept have risen and fallen, and Anne McCaffrey's Dragondrums was there to watch it all burn.
The Romans had nothing to say on this shit.
Anne McCaffrey is really just like a 4,000-year-old vampire that just wants to write her, like, fanfic isn't the right word, but certainly that is how she has decided to write her art. She's really good at it. I'm not going to pretend that she's not really good at it. She does her job well. The world building is solid. The characters are likable, except when they're not. And you know what?
We're going to get into that.
She made good cheese, and it's a good cheese to enjoy. Partake of the cheese. Add it to your charcuterie.
And we're going to get into all of that with the episode right here now. For today, I'm Tigereyes45, and I'm your newbie, and this is your host, Noah. So, Noah.
I'm the host. I'm host Noah.
I'm sorry. You, tried to talk talking. It just froze up. We're talking about Dragondrums.
It's Dragondrums, baby.
It's Dragondrums. We're finally finishing the trilogy.
As I said, we're finishing the trilogy, except this time, no Mentally. We've talked about Mentally a lot, and I think that Anne McCaffrey knew that we had talked about Mentally a lot, and maybe it was time for a new protagonist. You know, Mentally has gotten all of her wants and dreams and wishes. It's time for somebody else. It's time for Pimer.
You said no Mentally, and I'm looking at the notes, and literally Mentally is at the top to talk about.
You know, I didn't get a chance to read your notes before this episode, and that's kind of a rare new occurrence.
I didn't write down notes this time.
Oh, really?
I was literally spending so much time looking up stuff to better understand the politics in this book. I did not write notes on a Google Doc. I did make notes on my phone really quickly. But I did not write them in a Google Doc.
Let's try and get through this then. Let's try and give people a nice contextual grounding summary that also has enough extra contextual information that maybe McCaffrey assumed that people would like search out or would just like accept not knowing and move on with, which I guess was probably most of the reader's experience.
Probably.
So,
why don't you begin?
Okay, yeah. It's not like I read this book like in the summer back when we were originally going to do the episode, and it's been months since I read it. Let's pretend that I know what happened in the book. You correct me.
Refresh? Noah, that's not very professional of you.
I'm so sorry. I'm just not nearly professional enough. I'll work on it.
How dare you?
Let me make my apology video. I'll release it on the Patreon. Somebody can leak a transcription of it on Twitter and then get really angry at us. We'll do it all. We'll have it all.
God damn it. I think you've been watching too much Sarah's.
You know, it's funny. I haven't even watched the most recent drama stuff because I don't want to get... This is embarrassing because I don't want to get spoiled for Homestuck. Anyway...
Are you reading Homestuck?
I would like to read Homestuck. It is something that I feel like I will find very fascinating and like really open my eyes to a different sort of internet art that was there for a moment when in high school when I should have read it along with everyone else.
If you're gonna get into Homestuck, you gotta have the Homestuck wiki opened up at the exact same time. It won't make sense otherwise. You have to have them both up and double check that shit.
Is it not something that came out as like one specific like continuous linear thing?
No. No. There's nothing linear about Homestuck. The first act has 3 different timelines.
I don't mean in terms of like narrative structure. I mean, it wasn't like Marvel superheroes where there's a million different books out and you have to be reading each of them every month. Otherwise, nothing makes sense ever.
I mean,
there's just
it's all on one web page. But
it all came through like one pipe as one contiguous stream. It wasn't like a plurality of simultaneous streams.
I think so, but it definitely feels like it is when you're reading it. It definitely feels like it comes from multiple streams all at once while you're reading it.
I want to.
It's a lot.
I want to immerse myself in the slurry.
I only got to right when the trolls met the humans, and that's like in part 4 or some shit.
Oh,
and then I just read the ending. I just skipped to the end. I did not care.
Fair, that's fair. Maybe we'll do an Act 1 episode eventually.
Oh,
so,
no.
For those of you watching live, don't worry. We're gonna get to the episode at hand, no, that was me. That was totally me. Which is, let's see here. Y'all remember Pern, right? Y'all remember Pern? The distant planetoid in the far, far, far off future where humans colonized and then found out that every 200 years Pern gets like wiped out by a massive fungal plague from another comet that falls off and, you know, lands like rain that eats through everything and anything organic and then like makes its own nests and like eats everything else organic from the nest, and it's a whole kind of bad thing that wipes out all life on the surface.
You know what? That's a very human mistake to make, to not wait 200 years before settling on a planet to see what all happens on it.
That's funny you mention that. They like We'll have to read Dragon Dawn at some point because they do actually go into how they could have possibly missed that thing that happens every 200 years.
Holy shit! Okay.
The timing of everything that they did to prepare was really, unfortunately, like, just a bit off. It was quite unlucky. Like, if they had been a few years earlier, they would have understood how bad this idea was before they even left Earth.
I keep making these jokes and then finding out they're actually addressed in other books in the series.
She's very good at that. She loves to, like, I don't know if she, like, her brain works like our brains or maybe your brain specifically, or if she's, like, intentionally leaving these holes to fill in later. It could be any or all. She does love to not tell the reader stuff and then tell the reader that stuff later on.
Okay, well, let's tell our podcast listeners the stuff.
Long story short, does a number on their civilization and their colony. Lots of history is lost. We do know that at this time they made the dragons to, burn the flesh-eating fungi out of the sky. Don't worry, it makes sense. They made dragons that can teleport and time travel, but we find that out later. But that's not important right now, except it kind of is. But we'll get to that. Meanwhile, thousands of years later, at a music college.
God damn it. At the Bard's College from Skyrim, only they actually know how to spy.
Yeah.
That's what the setup is.
Imagine the Bard's College, but effective, and also better music, and also better people.
I
a
wouldn't
better
go
education.
That far. Better education, better music, better spies, absolutely. Better people, though.
Largely better staff, I would argue.
We'll get into that. I don't like them.
Man, you and Robinson, maybe we need to read. I have not read it. Maybe I'll need to read the Master Harper of Pern book that she released. That's, I think, a prequel that's all about like the young Harper and his adventures. And maybe then we can read that episode together and you'll be like, wow, he was a jerk as a kid.
I'll just feel more justification for my disdain of him. But yeah, so we're at the Harper Hall now.
Meanwhile, at the Harper Hall, in a fantasy world that gets marauded by falling flesh-eating fungus every year, and the dragons come and they save it. You remember
Minley
Pimer?
has fire lizards, and she becomes best friends with Pimer, who wanted fire lizards, and that's why he becomes friends with her, and that's why he tells her. And he gets so upset when she remembers that later on.
I choose to believe that they also have a genuine emotional connection beyond his, initial desire for fire lizards and to wheedle out the opportunity for more fire lizards. But I suppose, it is entirely up to interpretation.
Oh, I agree. They absolutely do. But Minley literally mentions in the second book how he's only around for fire lizards. And he gets offended, even though that's what he told her at the beginning of it.
It's both. It's a little of both.
Anyways, we're following Pimer the troublemaker this time around.
We're following Pimer the troublemaker. You may recall him as that young rapscallion with a beautiful voice and the heart of gold, and also like the heart of like other gold that he's stolen from other people, because he's a bit of a rapscallion, a hooligan, if you will. Anyway.
He's going through puberty. He can no longer sing soprano.
Yeah, the dude's a child music, like singing star of the choir, and then his voice drops. And that is a bad thing to happen.
It's not even that his voice is done dropping by the end of the story. It's still cracking.
Oh yeah,
so he can't sing it all right now because his voice hasn't settled yet. So it's just cracking constantly.
So the one thing that he does well, besides being a skullduggerous, rapscallion hooligan type, is no longer permitted. And he's like, beans, nuts. But it's really more like, oh no, my life is ruined. It's so bad. It's all over. Are they going to send me away? And then turns out, no. Recall, of course, if you will, the very subtle planting in Dragon Singer that basically the entire Harper Hall and all Harpers across the planet of Pern are actually a vast spy network working at the behest of Lord Robinson, who personally works at the behest of Bend and Weir, who are like the biggest and most important dragon the population.
Which is why he gets to pick up Minley and take her away without anyone confronting him or stopping him.
No. Don't worry. I'm just going to take the woman that has the most influence, knowledge, and control over this race of tiny dragons that are going to give us a lot of political power if we can come to understand them, because she makes 6 songs that are going to make excellent propaganda. But it's also a heartwarming YA story about getting, recovering from abuse.
Oh, yeah.
But that arc is over. The wish fulfillment happened. And we're with Peimer now, who's getting told by Robinson that because he's such a skullduggerous little hooligan, he's going to get to be a professional skullduggerer and work with his personal journeyman, mentally, and also the other one whose name escapes me, Sibel.
Sibel, yeah.
Sibel is also his name.
Wasn't Sibel one of the 2 people who walked mentally around the tables?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was Sibel and some other guy. And Sibel has always been kind of like a bit of a nice guy. Red flags. He's
really?
genuinely all right.
I totally thought he was okay, because he's the one who wants to learn how to do fishing.
He's totally a good guy. He's just been decent to her. It's mostly the joke. He's just been a genuinely nice human being to her. And to Peimer.
You had me so scared. I thought maybe he was shitty in the main series.
Please, you would have noticed before I do. Certainly, I can't convince you that Robinson,
fuck that man,
isn't also a genuinely nice human being. Besides being the head of the musical CIA.
So Peimer gets told that he's going to secretly be Robinson's assistant. While everyone else thinks he's just going to be a drummer's assistant. And drummers are handpicked, and they're a very small selected group within the college, so if you are a drummer, that's considered high praise. Not as high as, being Master Dominic's personal assistant, but high enough that people are going to be it's not all over for Peimer. He's got prospects.
Sure, he lost everything that made him special, but now he can go be a Morse code guy upstairs in the distant tower dorm that nobody sees, except for the other drum people.
And the whole time he's doing 2 jobs at once and just working himself to a bone, getting sent places with Minley or other people to carry messages and spy on things happening, reporting back to Robinson, going back to his drum lessons. He's a tired person.
Add on to this, the poor boy, has one accidental flub in his talks with Robinson, just a bit of discretion, indiscretion, just a bit too revealing his hand, just a bit too being a bit rude while talking about the horrible, awful, no good, very bad old timer dragon riders.
Mm-hmm.
Which, time out, the old timer dragon riders
are apparently horrible.
Are just genuinely horrible. Let me see, how can I explain these in a very short amount of time so we can get back to the actual plot and the characters that matter pertinent to the story.
Let me attempt. Aren't they dragon riders from the past that Lessa brought back to the future to help protect the world?
Yes.
And so now they refuse to listen to the dragon riders of the future because they're from the past and they think everybody's doing things wrong. Because they're from a time where dragon riders ruled everything, and now they don't have all the power.
Yeah, or at least they don't have all the power. They just have all the power. They used to be cruel tyrants that kind of did literally anything and everything that they wanted to the people around them, and now they're just respected, dignified people with all the power that do anything and everything, but politely.
Yeah, which is why part of the reason why people hated dragon riders until they proved that they could be useful again in protecting from the fungi.
There's definitely room for an AU timeline where people realize that dragon riders are just a bad idea and we should get rid of them.
I kind of want the opposite to happen. I want the dragons to just have so many eggs that everybody gets one.
Yeah. I think that also makes sense. Just democratize dragon riding.
Yeah. I think that would be the best choice. Instead of just having people who are at the Bend Weirhold, everyone who lives there gets a chance to be imprinted upon, but nobody outside of there. I feel like if you just kind of like how Aragon talks about doing it, but we never really get to see in the inheritance cycle. is where all the eggs are set up on display and people can come and walk through them to see if any eggs react to them before leaving. Like, I kind of like that idea.
Yeah. I think that makes sense too. It's so funny, and I think we should have a conversation about this. Maybe make a note, or maybe next time we do Riders of Pern, just to talk about how weird it is that in like the Dragon Rider fictions, first of all, how rare it is that the Dragon Riders are like at maximum power, at least when things begin. Like they're always like, it was terrible. We were at a real low point. There aren't many dragons around. It's never like, it's never like the Star Wars prequels where there are just, a million people with the special running around to begin with. Heck, even Star Wars didn't do it. It also started with... Anyway, the point being, the old timers are jerks from the past. They want to be jerks in the present. And why were they pertinent again? Oh yeah, because they're off...
Pimer spies on one.
Pimer spies on one. They've all been banished to the southern continent, at least the ones that don't want to like saddle up and work properly and like not cruelly. And they just don't do any work in the southern continent. There's like one hold there. Both the Weir and the hold are really new, and they generally get by because it turns out the southern continent is like full of these grubs that were genetically engineered to eat thread when it hit the ground and to make dragons obsolete, that people totally forgot about for thousands of years, because it's kind of hard to remember things when like everybody has to shelter in caves for like 50 years every couple centuries. The
writing isn't shared and everything has to be passed down through oral tradition. And there's probably was another Robinson at some point who didn't want that information getting around because that didn't benefit them.
The power is just so at the very tippy top, any number of things could just stop information from passing.
Yep.
And so part of what makes Robinson actually so radical is his notion of like, okay, we're going to like spread people from different like traditions, from different holds, from different crafts. We're going to get songs that are sung in this region, sung here. Everybody needs to know a little bit about everyone else. We all need to like unite as a planet.
Yeah, which is why he sends Pimer to the southern continent to spy on what's going on there.
Well, he doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't send Pimer, but he has been sending Sibel to secretly go there.
Yeah.
Pimer he sends to
sapphire mine.
A sapphire mine, a couple of gathers. It's all a gather, and then like some other major event being held at another hold. But we'll get to that. There's one other stressor in Pimer's life. It's not just that he's a drummer and also secretly a super spy and also a teenager. It's also that like I said, he's been told by Robinson that he just needs to learn some discretion. And so he just takes that to heart. And so when the time comes around and as a new drummer apprentice, he starts getting super bullied by the other apprentices, which at first seems like normal hazing. And then he like is doing
hazing
really good in his lessons.
Normal, but okay.
It was the 70s. At first it seems like what is, to the perspective of the people in universe, a normal degree of hazing, which is normal as far as the status of the world building is.
Yeah, Minley was lucky because she did not experience any of that because everybody realized, oh no, she's been very abused. We're leaving her alone. You leave her the fuck alone.
Except for the other girls.
Except for the other girls who didn't give a fuck.
It seems just other children are not a thing you want to hang around in the Dragon Riders universe. Don't be around other children.
They're not a thing you want to hang around in the real world. Children are very mean to each other.
Children are not good. I think that we should stop making them.
I have never been roasted harder than by my siblings.
I think Lord of the Flies made some excellent arguments for just never having kids. And this continues that same argument. I think we need to find a way to get our scientists to genetically engineer babies that come out as 21-year-old people. Still pretty insufferable, but like kind of meek and worn down about it.
I hate that, even though I know it's a joke, and I'm expecting a sci-fi horror series to be written about it eventually.
So we keep getting off track, which is the best part of listening to this podcast, that you can never really understand what's going on or what the subject matter is. Or at least I like to think that's part of the essential appeal. If you're keeping notes, Pimer's got the bullying going on, and he can't tell anybody about it because he's got to practice some discretion. So obviously he can't be indiscreet and tell people that he is like being super hyper bullied. People are urinating and defecating on his bed and all sorts of horrible, terrible, no good.
Again, it's not normal behavior.
The journeyman that's in charge of the apprentice drummers is like beating him repeatedly because the drum messages, that's what the drummers are for. It's not for musicalness. Everybody can play the drums musically. The drummers are there to, like I said, be the Morse code system, except they do actually have a telegraph system that recently got invented, but that's beside the point. The drummers are there to send signals. And so the youngest drummer apprentice, all the drummer apprentices are responsible for passing the signals down to whoever needs to get them in the Harper Hall, and then taking them back up and then sending them on their way. Peimer gets targeted when some of these messages that are supposed to be secret start becoming the top subject of gossip around the hall. Now, think for a moment. Most of this hall is people that are learning music. Maybe they'd pick up some of the like drum beat messaging that would go around, and maybe everybody would know a little bit about every message that's getting banged out at the highest decibel level like 20 times a day.
Yeah, and there's also the issue of Peimer even says at the beginning he knew the basics because everybody's taught the basics when they arrive, except for Minnie, because she was in a weird situation. But he wanted to learn more because he wanted to understand the messages fully. And before he even can, he's immediately getting blamed for passing the messages out.
Yeah,
he doesn't even understand them fully before he gets the shit blamed on him.
And then even when he does fully understand them and he's hiding that, he doesn't want people to know that he actually has like a really extensive knowledge of the drum beats, because then he'll just get blamed even more. But like, he is getting directly blamed. Everybody thinks it's in because he's a rapscallion hooligan ne'er-do-well. Of course he'd be the one to do it.
And he just joined and the rumors are just starting.
So
despite
obviously
the fact
it
that
is...
there are always constantly rumors. There was rumors in the last book about the drum messages because people could understand them and mentally had no idea what the fuck they were.
Anyways, so obviously he needs to get beaten and abused, and we should just not care when people start being super horrible and mean to him, and also start like getting bodily fluids on his rest bed. And then, of course, it goes a step further with actual attempted murder. Peimer has this habit of like zooming up and down the stairs to get places quickly so that nobody will think that he was dawdling and maybe spreading rumors about what the drum messages were. So one time he's zooming down the stairs to, go do a thing. And then, somebody has greased up the stair and the handrail. And so he comes tumbling down the stone stairwell, knocking himself out, giving himself a concussion.
Yeah.
And that's suddenly when, everyone's favorite head of the Harper Hall, my main absolute.
That's when Robinson comes.
No, it's Sylvina. Sylvina comes.
Oh, yeah, Sylvina does come and picks him up. Sylvina also, heals him earlier in the book, too. Because after he gets, hit the first couple of times, she finds out and she, massages him and cures the bruises.
She also shows him how to clean the poo out of his furs.
Yeah.
Anyway, she finds him and is like, okay, this is enough. I'm going to chew Robinson out one and then another. And then we're getting this boy out of the murderous drum apartment. We stand Sylvina. Sylvina's a wonderful woman.
I love her so much. She cares so much about these kids.
I'm so glad to be reading a fantasy novel with teachers that are responsible, care for the youths, and go out of their way to make sure that their safety is ensured.
And constantly get on the teachers who don't make sure the safety's ensured. How fucking dare you, Robinson?
Robinson, you're so distracted being the head of the musical CIA that you weren't paying attention to one of your favorite students and their well-being.
Again, remember when this happened to Minnie 3 years ago? Yeah, it's been 3 years since the last book.
You dangus, you dingus, I ought to hang you by your beard.
That's what she says, isn't it? She'll hang him by his beard.
I don't believe she ever says anything of the sort, but let's pretend that she did.
I feel like she would, but not in front of the children.
She just
because she threatens him a lot when she doesn't realize Minnie's listening. And then she'll immediately be like, "Oh, Minley, you're here. I'm so sorry if you heard any of that."
She's a wonderful lady.
Moving
We
on.
all aspire to be her or have someone like her in our lives. And she comes in clutch and saves Pimer, which resolves that major issue. But he's still got to do a few more spy missions.
Mm-hmm.
He's still trying to be a spy, and that's looking good. He's got spy skills. Even if things haven't gone too optimally the last couple times he's done a spy, it's all right. It's gonna be all right. He's gotten to do some cool stuff. He's gotten to see a dragon hatching. That never happens. He's gotten to hang out with Miriam, who's great. And got a green dragon. And I hope she gets to be the center of a book at some point, but I have yet to see that book. Even though it seems like she's setting her up to be a part of a book. What happens is Pimer is sent to another mission at the hold of this real jerk, Lord Marin. And we won't get into why he's a real jerk, except that he's a real jerk and he wants to leave the world a little bit worse when he dies by not naming an heir. So just a massive jerk, dying of syphilis. And frankly, he deserves it for what he's done. Total jerk.
I don't know a lot about this guy. I just know that he refused to name a successor, which could cause the whole country to go to war with itself, because if he doesn't name one, then his relatives are going to be fighting, and they're all going to take sides of the major political players, and that's going to start a war. That's all I know about him. And Robinson does a war crime.
Robinson does a little bit of a war crime. Really, it's not the focus of the story, so maybe we don't even have to cover it until we talk about Robinson and his war crime. For now, something goes a bit awry, because you see what this no good, very bad, terrible holder, Lord Marin, is doing, is trading with those horrible, no good, very bad old-timers in the South. He's the one that's been supplying them and getting them all the, essential stuff that they need to, feed dragons and clothe the dragon riders and all their, the people that work at the weir, in exchange for fire lizard eggs. So Pimer, rad lad that he is, goes in, steals a queen fire lizard egg to use as evidence. But people notice that's missing. Alarm goes off. Pimer hides. He's been up for 48 hours straight, so he falls asleep in his hiding place. His hiding place was one of the bags full of supplies to go down to the southern continent, and it looks like they were due to be picked up in the middle of the night. Pimer wakes up on the southern continent in a bag. And then he runs off and he does a hatchet for about a month, maybe.
He's living in the wilderness, surviving like he imagined Minley did.
Yeah. And he's doing it surprisingly well. And he gets and the queen dragon egg hatches, and he's hanging with her, and they're surviving the thread together. They find a runner beast whose mother was taken out by the thread, and so they take care of her. And it's all good old times. Everybody up north is panicking and having a bad time. Sibel and Meneley have kind of a thing in the middle of a boat, but it's fire lizard heat induced, so it doesn't count. Did you miss that part? Did you miss the part where Meneley and Sibel sleep together in the boat on the way down south because her queen, whose name escapes me,
I just thought they both fell asleep in the boat. What?
Oh, it doesn't matter. It's not relevant to the story at all.
He's so much older than her. Oh,
5-10 years.
Is she even 18 yet? It's been 3 years. She was what, 14 in the last one?
Yeah, no, it's bad. It's bad. It's a bad.
No, I missed that. Gross. Moving on.
Okay, anyway, he runs into some people from the Southern Hold, and they're and there's this great gal who knows all the plants and is responsible for collecting a lot of medicinal supplies while people are gathering another very essential plant in large supplies and preparing it. She and Pimer hit it off, have a great time. Pimer tries to not tell her that he was a spy and got sent here accidentally. Finally, everybody meets at the Southern Hold, where Sibel and Meneley have tracked down Pimer's last location, and they finally meet up, and it's a great old time. And They exchange some messages with Robinson, and Robinson's like, you know what? You did such a good job hanging down there. We need some eyes and ears down there. Why don't you be our resident map maker for the southern continent? Just hang out there, wander around. We'll call you if we need you for anything else. Go off and have a good one, son. This is definitely where your arc was going the whole time. You seem like you're very comfortable with this. And Pimer's like, this is exactly what I wanted. I didn't want to be a musician. I didn't want to be a spy. I wanted to be down here in the South, being a bit of a hatchet. And that's Dragondrums.
Minnie Mary Sibel.
Ooh.
Oh, I hate that. Oh, I hate that. Fuck Sibel. I hate that.
What is the age difference? Can you check the wiki and let us know what the age difference is? Just for the record, so we all know.
The wiki just have the ages named listed at the top, so now I'm have to go through and read. Why don't you start the next topic while I search this shit?
Okay, here we are. So if you hadn't noticed, that the whole story takes kind of a left turn at the end there and becomes Hatchet for some reason. Not that I dislike it. I like the Hatchet portions.
Hatchet without saying which Hatchet. He's talking about the novel written by whoever.
About the kid that survives a plane crash and with his hatchet. It's a very popular children's book. I am still shocked that
Never fucking heard
one,
of it.
that you didn't know what it was. Two, that there's a popular horror franchise that's also called Hatchet. I'm talking about the children's novel.
It's a slasher film. I know the slasher film. I don't know the fucking children's novel.
Okay, anyway, hey, in the chat below, comment which Hatchet you thought I was talking about.
Please, because
please do. Boost our engagement. We get like one comment a month.
Okay, so yeah,
that's Dragondrums, man.
That's
I don't know where to go from here. Actually, that's a lie. I do. Let's talk a bit about, like, I guess, like, the first thing that I want to talk about is how very interesting that turn is at the end. How suddenly, like, the whole focus of Pimer's arc kind of shifts out of left field. And I think it has a lot of interesting stuff to do with, like, McCaffrey and how she works as a writer and how she kind of structures a book. Because they are not 3-act structures at all. They start, events happen, and then when we reach a sufficiently satisfying point, they end with the heavy implication that stuff is just going to keep happening. She writes really well for the sort of book that is going to be part of a larger world where, at least in the Dragondrums books, she writes really well for this idea of a larger world where there's just a bunch of other things happening simultaneously that you might, as a reader, not wholly understand given this limited window that you're offered into it. And you're just going to have to kind of accept that as a viewer, that this is just part of your experience of the world. Part and parcel of that, though, is that sometimes things just kind of happen and you're not sure what's going on. And sometimes those things are character decisions, like Pimer's choice and decision that he just prefers being down in the South, which is not unbelievable. I don't think that's a good metric for judging the quality of fiction, really, especially not fiction, about dragons on a far off distant planet that gets attacked by organic flesh eating fungi every 200 years. But it is definitely one that is not planted in the traditional sense, I would argue. It is something that I totally think that a young boy would think that being, being Survivor Man Bear Grylls would be a bit more fun than being a kind of a mediocre singer, or maybe a really good one if he's really, really lucky and gets a good voice after he, finishes maturing a bit, or kind of a middling spy per his experiences. I get that. I understand that. They're the same age. They're the same age?
They're both 15.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not creepy age-wise.
Okay.
But, like, he totally comes off as, like, 18 or older in the second book. Like, he definitely comes off as an adult, and maybe that's just how, like, Minnie sees him, because the book starts with him becoming a journeyman, and he apparently became one at the same age Robinson became one, and Robinson became a journeyman at the age of 15.
Okay.
And technically there's inconsistency in the book because Sibel is supposed to be a little bit older than that.
Mm-hmm.
But the time, she messed up on the timelines. There are, 5 characters who ages she forgets and messes up and retcons accidentally in other books. And Sibel's one of them.
Okay.
So, they're the same age. She's not sleeping with an adult who's much, much older than her. Okay.
Sure, okay.
That bothers me so much.
So now that you're back from that well, I want to ask you, as a first-time reader, what did you think about Peimer's decision here? I don't dislike it. I just feel like it feels kind of, whoa, that came out of nowhere.
So here's the thing. It didn't make sense, in my opinion. I thought, after everything he had gone through, Peimer was going to come up with his own way of being a spy for Robinson without having to go back to the Harper Hall and still be a drummer. I thought he was going to use that whole situation to hold above Robinson's head to figure out, well, not to figure out, but to basically blackmail Robinson into giving him a better position.
Mm-hmm.
And making him a journeyman faster. And he does become one. But none of it happened the way I thought it would. And while I could definitely see Peimer enjoying the South and agreeing to stay down there, it kind of feels like Robinson's doing it to get rid of him rather than to actually keep using him. It almost feels as if Anne McCaffrey wrote herself into a corner and decided she didn't want Peimer to be a major player halfway through the book. So she had to come up with a way to finish the story with him without him having to be super important later on.
If I am recalling, actually, what happens in The White Dragon, I believe Peimer shows up there, and a lot of that latter half of that book takes place in the southern continent. So I wonder if it's kind of the other way around, and she knew she wanted to have Peimer in that one, but she also needed somebody that knew the southern continent to be the guide person in that book.
That's fair.
Maybe that's what that was.
That's fair, and that very well could be it. I've only read the Harper Hall trilogy, so I know nothing else about any of the other books, and personally for me, it felt like she was just trying to keep him there for whatever specific reason.
There was a utilitarian...
That's why he decided to just stay down there and agree to it without... Because Peimer... Okay, so here's my thing about Peimer. Peimer as a character is very vindictive.
Yes.
And I don't mean that he's cruel or anything. He's not. But if you piss him off or get at him, he's gonna get back at you. And I kept waiting for him to get back at Robinson. And he never does. And that was a bit weird to me because he doesn't let Robinson off easy in the second book. When Robinson's not keeping mentally safe and thinking about her health, and he just confronts him in a passive aggressive way, but that's more so than what anyone besides Sylvina does, or Sylvinia. She's the only one that does more than that when it comes to Robinson. So I was waiting for him to have another moment like that with the Master Harper, and it never came, and that was a bit surprising to me. I also but I feel like this book is mostly written on everyone else's preconceived notions of Peimer, and Peimer has to work past those. He's caused a lot of trouble in the past, he's given a lot of problems, things like that. He's known as a troublemaker, so now he has to figure out how to do his job, even though everyone already sees him as a troublemaker.
Yeah, and it's really coming for him because he wants to do good. And I think the reason he doesn't come after Robinson is partially just because he doesn't blame him and he respects him too much. Everybody really likes Robinson.
I don't like him. I don't like. Fuck Robinson.
I don't think he's that bad a dude, even with the war crime.
Okay.
And the fact that he's like the head of the spies. I think that
I am
largely
really glad that Peimer did not have to be involved in the war crime.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very, very happy he did not have to get his hands dirty in that. Okay.
I mean, if it prevented, a needless war at the behest of a cruel man, I don't know.
Let the adults handle it, not the fucking 13-year-old.
Yeah. Don't get the 13-year-old's hands bloody with that. I totally respect that.
Just don't get the 13-year-old's hands bloody with that. Thank you. I agree with you on that point, Robinson, and that point alone. You fucking cad.
He's definitely the thing about all of Pern is that it's a terrible, no good, very bad system to the core.
Horrible system.
It's super stratified. Most people as human beings do not matter at all. They are just another resource. They are just common and lowly and uncared for, and it's a very small class of people that get to have any respect at all. And among those, a very, very small handful of maybe 24 people on the planet that actually really make decisions that matter.
Yeah, and even then, if you make one of the decisions that matter, that does not mean you're going to get respect. Yes, I'm talking about Lessa. She deserves more.
Lessa, who's going to do the stuff that matters, make the decisions that matter,
and get none of the respect.
Because the misogyny is deep in this.
This story, part of what makes me feel like Peimer's journey is so much different from Meneley's is that he doesn't have to deal with the misogyny.
It definitely, it removes what has been up to this point kind of a major theme in the story. And as a consequence of that, we kind of... It is interesting the female characters that she writes when she's writing to interact with Meneley versus the ones that she writes to interact with Peimer. Because the one overlap is Sylvina, which makes sense because Sylvina is kind of written to be the good mom.
Yeah.
That is...
She's literally filling the stereotypical role of a mother figure who runs the whole house and provides for everybody and makes sure everyone's fed and taken care of.
Not to be confused with the one that is basically the same personality running around over at Bend and Weir, who is also the head woman that is also the mom that also takes care of everyone.
Again, it's a stereotypical role that gets fulfilled by a couple different people throughout these 3 books.
But what makes it, what I think is interesting, and what I think, again, the reason that she gets used for both Meneley and Peimer is that the mom dynamic is something that is not bound by gender, at least as conceived in very heteronormative, cisnormative, etc.
Please elaborate on
visions
that.
of vision. Okay, so what I was about to bring up was the other female character of kind of note that Peimer runs into, which is the, very cool Southern Continent gal whose name does escape me. Let me look it up for just a second here. Shara.
Yeah, Shara.
Shara here, who shows up to be kind of, not exactly, but very similar to kind of his manic pixie dream gatherer.
I could see that.
Yes, let me tell you about how sick the Southern Continent is and how rad it is and how cool it is that you're down here, which is so much cooler than the Northern Continent. Come travel with me for days as we gather medicinal herbs and roots together, and maybe you'll fall in love with this land and maybe with the people there too. It's
it's Tarzan. It's the Tarzan scenario happening where Tarzan shows James all the great things about the forest and Jane decides to live there forever.
She is his Tarzan. It's not subtle, but that is kind of the dynamic that she goes for. For all the uniqueness of the world building, a lot of these character dynamics, do come down to, at least in these YA books, pretty transparent archetypes and tropes. And they're very gendered throughout, which is why these stories, I think, feel so different when the gender changes, because the very nature of the gender of the tropes that they run into, of the characters that they run into, just change on a dime. There are no bad girls that Meneley can be not like other girls with. There are no cruel and jealous old women that hate you for your talent and your goodness. which is a perhaps cruel and unfair like summary of some of the characters in the earlier books, but it was also very clearly the tropes that they were drawing on, even if they were drawing on and doing them in a really good way, which is what sets kind of those first two books apart, right? We talked about this.
There's that, but it also, personally for me, it felt like because Pimer wasn't running into all the same misogyny and shit that Minley was running into.
Oh yeah,
that the stakes did not feel as high. It did not feel as serious. It did not feel as if Pimer was in as much danger as Minley was. Even though Pimer literally nearly dies, it still doesn't feel as if it doesn't have the same kind of gravitas.
You know, I would agree with that. It really does. It's funny that there does seem to be that decreased weight, and I would argue that there are parts of the book that I think kind of maybe not the same gravitas, but a similar magnitude thereof. The first half of the book, when he's worried about his indiscretion and his like misunderstanding and like hyper focus on like a handful of words that Robinson gave him, which is, you know, an understandable thing that I'm sure a lot of very attentive and like intuitive kids, much like Pimer, you know, in the real life kind of go through.
I was about to say, like, I know like when I was a kid growing up, I did that constantly. I knew a lot of like other girls who did that too, who like replay words adults had said to them and like fixate on, holy shit, how do I avoid doing this in the future again?
Yeah.
So I totally related to that part of Pimer's thinking, and I get why he did that.
I think that in that moment, I think is the strongest kind of bit of internal conflict, because that's where it is kind of internal conflict, really.
He does that with other people too, when they barely know him but say things about him. And I kind of feel like those are the most serious moments throughout the book. Rather than like the attempted murder, as horrible as that sounds, it just didn't come off as serious to me.
It's funny. I think that it definitely, as a scene, as an episode in the story, it is fun and interesting to read. I really love getting to see the scene between Sylvina and Robinson. Like we cut away from Pimer's perspective and we get to like have this interaction between these two characters that I personally enjoy seeing, and also, you know, successfully relieves a lot of that tension we were experiencing. But I would agree that the way that it relieves the tension and the like episode of it is very like divorced from Pimer's internal conflict. Literally, Pimer is unconscious for like this resolution and this moment when we start to step away from that issue. The concern about the internal concerns about discretion, indiscretion, and stuff like that, I believe are still kind of present, or at least they haven't been wholly resolved at that point. But absent the external pressure exacerbating that in the form of these bullies, I think that it's true. I agree that kind of marks a turning point where that element goes away and isn't really present for the rest of the book, and certainly isn't really there when we get to the hatchet part for the last quarter.
Do you kind of wonder if maybe that conversation with Sylvania is why Robinson decides to send Pimer away and keep him away? Because it kind of feels like to me that she keeps pointing out to Robinson that he's not doing a good job taking care of the kids under his charge that he favors and tries to give powerful positions to, even if he's not outright stating that he's doing that. It kind of feels like with Minley and Pimer, he's trying to help them, but doesn't know how to do that in a way that doesn't cause them harm. Like, he is almost unsure of how to protect them. Because with the Minley situation, she takes care of the eggs with so much dedication. She harms herself as well. And she does this because she sees Robinson doing it, and she doesn't want to fail him because he's already doing so much. And so Vinia has to point out to him what's happening with her. And that's what she does here with Pimer, too.
I think I would agree with that, except for the fact that like Pimer's decision to stay here is something that really gets like the Master Harp. I think that would make sense as an explanation for why he gives the go ahead, but it's not his idea technically. Like at the end of the book,
that's fair. That's
it
fair.
is somebody. It is like Pimer asking, Sibel being like, "Hey, Pimer, you could be like you could just do the drums here, like teach the harper we have stationed here how to do the drum messages thing, and we could like set you up down here if you like it so much." And Pimer's like, "Really? Let's ask him." And so they text Robinson, and Robinson texts back via Dragon, "Sure."
Okay, well then not.
But I agree that seems like a good solid reason for why he'd like, oh yeah, keep him down there where he's proven to be safe.
Yeah. I kind of feel like if Sylvania is the one fulfilling the stereotypical role of the carer who's able to take care of all of the children and is able to watch them and protect them, it kind of feels like Robinson falls into that opposing stereotype of the neglectful father who doesn't notice he's neglectful.
Mm-hmm. And he's definitely got parts of that, which is unfortunate because of, which I don't know if it's unfortunate. It's just he's and there it is. I get it now. It's not really anything he does. It's that he's the bad father, and there's nothing you hate more than people that endanger children. There it is. It's all come together now.
I legitimately cannot stand those kinds of characters. It's a big problem I have with Aragon too in the inheritance cycle.
Rough.
Sorry, I know you were saying something beforehand, but I had that idea about Robinson and like Sylvania's dynamic and how it affects Minoli and Pimer, and my brain immediately latched on.
And of course, the fact that apparently, and I only know this because of like one of the side Pern books my dad has that's like a bunch of portraits and short bios. But apparently, again, I mentioned this, he and Sylvina used to like hook up in the past. We've mentioned this before. And yeah, totally. The mom-dad dynamic very much fits with them and how they kind of comport themselves around, the students and regarding their safety.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That was just a thread my mind decided to like latch onto and go down. And it kind of feels like it ties into the politics that's happening in this world as well.
Yeah. And
because while we do see female leading characters who do get to make the decisions like Lessa does, and we get to see other ones that have random occurrences happen to them that they think is impossible, but why would it be? Because it can happen to the guys like Miriam and the green dragon. Because apparently for some reason, green and blue dragons do not imprint on girls and women.
Green, blue, brown, and bronze. Only the gold have historically bonded with women because sexism.
Yeah.
Because of the sexism.
Despite the fact that, like, all of the colors can bond to men. And so, like, Miriam points...
The gold can't... Well, anyway.
Thought...
Haven't historically. I'm sure that a cool writer would have done that at some point.
I thought the gold ones could as well.
The gold fire lizards kind of bond to whoever, but that's because mostly the men have gotten their hands on them.
Maybe that's where, like, my confusion is happening at, because there are different rules for the fire lizard colors and the dragon colors, and I think I'm getting the two mixed up. But
that makes sense.
It also just doesn't make sense to me why any dragons couldn't bond with anybody. It feels like that's just another aspect of sexism in this world and misogyny that people interpreted as a literal rule of the land, and Miriam's event proves that it's not.
And what's really, like, Dragon Dawn here, what's really interesting is, of course, this law of the land is itself something that was, like, artificially created when they made the dragons. The woman who made the dragons was a weird kind of misogynist lady who decided that she wanted the dragons to have these weird limitations, and she wanted the queens to like not be able to breathe fire without limiting their ability to like reproduce. And like, so there's a whole mess of reasons. I don't know where the misogyny of like who gets to be a fighting dragon rider, I don't think that's an element in Dragon Dawn, but at some point that also emerged, this idea that only men can ride the fighting dragons, which is to say literally any dragon that isn't a gold.
And that I think that's what I find most interesting about Anne McCaffrey's books. And I know we're not focusing on like Peimer and his journey right now, but something that I find really, really interesting about this trilogy specifically is that Anne McCaffrey has she's very skillful at writing misogynistic women characters and pinning them against other women in a way that doesn't feel like it's happening just because women can't be friends.
Yeah. And in the same way, she's really skilled at taking these like tropes that are traditionally kind of misogynistic, like the girl that isn't like other girls, you know, and like the kind of hateful, jealous women, and largely doing them kind of well with a clear understanding of like human motivations and like what would put these circumstances together, and also like not giving into the weaknesses of those tropes per se.
So that was something that I actually didn't like about the second book in this trilogy. And that's because I felt like she played too much into the not like other girls, all the other girls hate mentally trope.
It definitely comes out a lot stronger and not really as good because we don't get to interact with those other girls enough.
And that was my biggest issue with it. It kind of felt like she fell into a pothole of accidentally writing misogynistically when you're trying to turn it up on its head. But in this book, it kind of feels like when we're stepping out of Minalie's shoes and into Peimer's, she's able to write about the misogyny in the world and how everybody, including Peimer, just kind of accepts it, even though you see it shouldn't be this way. And I think that comes from the fact that, like, Peimer is a guy, and Peimer has never really had to think about things from a woman's perspective, so he doesn't state in his mind how, well, that's clearly wrong, like Minalie does.
Yeah.
And I think that really helps kind of turn into focus what she was trying to do in the last two books with all the misogynistic female characters. And kind of like their hatred for Minalie for not automatically accepting the misogyny of the world. And the fact that it's a female scientist that like genetically made the rules for the dragons, it's very interesting to me because I caught that, Noah, and I did not know that. And that kind of puts another piece of the puzzle in with what she's trying to say about how women, while they can be each other's enemies, more often than not, they're pitted against each other because of misogynistic values. And if it's a woman who incorporated all of this and caused those same rules to kind of become laws of the land inadvertently by deciding that the golden dragons had to be weaker and didn't have as powerful fire as the other ones, then that, I really want to read that, and I really want to dissect that character, because I bet I'm gonna hate her, but I bet it's gonna make everything make a hell of a lot more sense.
It is, you know, I don't want to say too much too nice about this. A woman who is a science fiction, white, you know, cis writer from the 70s.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to load too much praise on her, but I think I absolutely agree that she has this strong penchant for, you know, writing bigotry and bias and constructing her worlds as a whole, at least the world of Pern, in a way where it becomes, you know, where these dynamics and these biases are explained, but they're not explained in kind of the traditional essentialist way, because she likes to think these things through. She, you know, likes to have plots that make sense. You know, this is the woman who will stop the plot dead in her tracks so that she can explain why Peimer fell asleep in the middle of the night while hiding in the dark. Like, there has to be an explanation for that. There has to be like a whole like reason why that went down. There has to be a whole reason why he's running away from the people that we know are bad, even though it doesn't wholly make sense. She loves her like tight unity of plots, and part of that is that she really that she can't just write kind of bias and bigotry on its own. It has to have an explanation. It can't just be, this is just the way things are. There has to be some very human reasoning as to why all this is going down. And so she's doing kind of her due diligence. It's that great example of like, writing that handles these topics badly is lazy writing, because you can't write this way if you're being inquisitive.
And I really like the fact that it's not just...
Or you can't write this way unless...
Well, I find it really interesting that a female scientist incorporated those roles because she was kind of misogynistic, and that in turn affected everything else. It's not the only thing that's causing misogyny in this world to exist. And we know that already, because we know it's also how, like, power has been handled and passed down, and how women have purposely been excluded as, like, time kind of goes backwards in these instances. And I like, even though while there are many explanations, it's not just one thing contributing to all of that.
Yeah.
And that gives it a very realistic feel. And I'm not trying to say that she's perfect at writing it. Again, I feel as if there's a lot of moments where she goes for something, but falls a little bit short of it, including, like, Minley and her issues with the other girls in the Hold in Harper Hall. But at the same time, I do think that is probably where her strongest aspect of writing comes from. Having so many explanations for everything, and yet all those explanations work well together. Unless you focus on the dragons just a little too much, because those are mythological creatures, and not all the rules for them make fucking sense.
What are you saying, that it's really hard to come up with a hard science fiction explanation for the genetically modified, native, teleporting, time-traveling, fire-breathing giant creatures?
What I'm saying is that the forwards of her work contradict each other sometimes, because in the first book, it's an empathy rating that decides if you can bond with a dragon or a fire lizard or not. And in the other books, it's, well, how much are you around them before they can escape you?
That's for the fire lizards. That's the fire lizards.
But in the forward of the first book, it's literally called an empathy rating.
Yeah,
which makes it sound a lot more scientific empathy, and clinical.
It's empathy.
And it makes it seem like these are getting rated, and nowhere in the books have they been rated yet.
I think that's it, like the part where it's talking about like the earliest generations of dragons, back when they still had all the like high-tech technology, and they could measure what they call empathy, which is just telepathic power. Lessa can do it a bit. I don't know if you noticed that Lessa has psychic powers. It doesn't come up much.
I did notice it a little bit, because she's able to like figure some stuff out when talking to Minley without Minley directly stating it.
Yeah. She can also do a bit of like a lean on people when she wants to, and the biggest power of all is that she can talk to literally every dragon.
Yeah. And isn't she able to talk to the fire lizards as well?
I believe she can talk to all the fire lizards, but they don't really have as much to say.
Talked to Minley's, but I cannot remember because that was 2 books ago and several months.
We'll get to Lessa. She's great. She's great. The first book is rough to get through.
Oh,
but like this one, again, all the books are really kind of they're about getting these characters kind of into a more and more comfortable place as time goes on. So it has to start out really, really, really uncomfortably, so that there's a lot of room for things to be comfortable. Which kind of
just
brings
doesn't have to go through the uncomfortability of the first 2 books.
Pimer just has to go through the uncomfortability of like a book and an implied backstory. So it does bring me to a topic that you mentioned that you wanted to go through, which is how the way that this is, these stories are kind of a comfort food, really, for all the unpleasantness. They're really generally on the whole really pleasant and kind of warm. There's
except for the first one of the Harper Hall trilogy. That one is really, really, really tough until like the last 2 chapters.
That's kind of the Dragon Riders of Pern, again, they start out really, really rough in a really, really, really dark place, and then by the end, they like let you out the door with a warm cookie.
Things can get better.
So there's there's a real catharsis to them. And in that structure and in the nuances of it, I think it bears a resemblance in a lot of ways, as I've already said, to what I understand of fan fiction, a thing that I pretend to know more of than I actually do. But you actually do know a lot about fan fiction, and you mentioned, well, you said something to me earlier in our preamble. Do you want to? Why don't you just start?
I know
off?
what you're talking about, and that was recently in one of my English classes. I was talking about with some other students who also read and write fan fiction.
Yes.
About how a lot of like flash fiction and short published work and fan fiction is moving kind of away from conflict being the main pusher in a story to it being kind of comforting fluff pieces where it's internal emotions that push a story rather than there being any specific kind of conflict. So what we were actually talking about, what struck up the conversation was somebody in the class wrote a story where there was no conflict at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all about a character enjoying some time with their grandmother talking. And it was a really comforting, peaceful piece that just made you feel better when reading it. And there's been a rise in that in, again, flash fiction works, short publication works, and fan fiction especially. And it kind of feels like this story, especially the story with Peimer, is that there's conflict in the story because it's a novel. There has to be some conflict in it. But for the most part, it's just wish fulfillment and seeing good things happen to characters that help you feel better by the end. That make you feel better about the whole journey of the story as well. And I find that really interesting because one thing that I was told when I was in, I don't remember, middle school or high school, was that no story can exist without conflict. And that the conflict can be emotional or physical, but there has to be conflict there. And I feel as if there's no better contrary evidence to that than fluff fan fiction pieces. Because a lot of them don't have conflict. They're just characters hanging out, relaxing, and talking. And even though they don't have a lot of conflict, they can make you feel better after having read them as well. And that's what... I feel like I'm rambling again. But that's what I was really thinking about when reading this story. That's what it kind of feels like.
And and I guess my question, do you think, as we've discussed, that that's because of the way that this specific story kind of loses sight of its internal conflict towards the end? Or is it because of the way that some of these sequences, the way that the conflict is, the tension is kind of released, operates in a different way from a more cinematic book? The way that, like, the conversation between Sylvina and Robinson is certainly kind of grand and cathartic in a way, but is also kind of, emotionally uplifting because it happens in the middle of a kind of a long sequence of Peimer finally being taken care of by people, where there is no real conflict. There's no real pushback. It is just, okay, you've been through a lot of rough stuff, so let's sit down, let's get you into a bed, let's make sure Robinson knows what to do and take care of you better. And much like with Mentally, let's just make sure that all of your needs are being met and see if we can't start working towards your, wants.
So this is going to sound really indecisive, but there's a reason behind it. I think it's both.
Yeah.
I think both play an essential part in it. Because with the way Amiga 3 writes, and I'm only saying that based off the 3 short Harper Hall trilogy books I've read so far, there's never one reason for anything. And I feel like that's also true for why her books feel so cathartic. Because not only does the conflict slowly disappear, and by the end of the book, it's just the characters getting to exist and being rewarded for going through everything, but it's also that there are other people who do go out of their way to try and take care of these characters and meet their needs. And I think both play a huge part in why the Harper Hall books feel so comforting and relaxing, because I remember after finishing the first one, I told you that was really difficult to read and get through. And it was extremely difficult, not just because of all the abuse she was going through, but because it was just so much negativity. And that's not a bad thing. I really enjoy dark books that touch on darker topics and have, like, a lot of negativity you gotta get through before you can get to the good bits. But that ending really saved it for me. The ending where Minnie gets to go away and gets to live peacefully, and people want to take care of her and teach her that she deserves to live peacefully.
Yeah, it's reminiscent of, like, sorry.
No, go ahead, because I've been talking a lot, so feel free.
Yeah, just it's very, in a way, it's reminiscent of, like, those stories where they want to do, like, a fake out, though, like, you know, horrible bad things are happening, it looks like it's going to be a dark ending, and then they do a fake out, oh, but what if they got rescued and carried off and lived happily ever after? Except
it didn't feel like a fake out.
It doesn't feel fake. It doesn't feel unauthentic. You don't see a twist or anything coming, because there genuinely isn't one coming, you know, in the same way that the horribleness felt solid and kind of inevitable. In a lot of ways, when these kind of people come around to make everything better, it also feels there's also this certain, there's an inevitability of, like, when Sylvina finds Pimer on the stairs and realizes that something has gone wrong, or when Sylvina finds Pimer having recently gotten concussed on the stairs and notices that there's grease on his boot and that something is not right here, and starts telling off the journeyman, you kind of instantly know, okay,
it's all gonna be better now.
It's all good. It's all coming together now.
Exactly. And that conversation she has with Rametin really just drives home how it's all going to be better. It's to the point where, like, even when he ended up in the southern continent where all, like, these horrible people are and the old timers are abusing their powers, I wasn't too concerned about him.
Yeah.
Because we already had a moment where, like, bad things were happening and it got good again, so it's gonna get good for Pimer again. Even though the good choice was to keep him in the southern continent, I didn't really like the ending, but I do still feel as if it was still rewarding enough to keep that same comfort food feel.
Maybe the point of that...
These books do feel like comfort food.
Maybe the point of the ending is just to give Pimer some time to, like, just camp. just to, like, camp around for a bit.
Camp,
like,
enjoy time on your own.
Have some time on your own, get some adventures, have a fire lizard, if it'll cheer you up. Just get some, like, clarity. Maybe he's supposed to be just finding himself on the southern continent, and that was, like, her whole idea. Like, okay, all the actual, like, stressors are away. Now it's just time for him to be himself and really get connected with Pimer.
And he doesn't have to worry
wants.
about Robinson's words or anybody else's words while he's in the southern continent, because he already knows all these people suck ass. And I'm not trying to, like, insult Shara. I'm specifically talking about all the people in power in the southern continent. He knows they are horrible. He's already had to deal with them.
I don't have to interact with these people. I'll just go on my own,
He's like,
get my cool
fuck
stuff.
it. I'm out in the wilderness, away from them. I know how to avoid them. It's fine.
It's fine. It really is fine. So maybe that's the point of it. Maybe it makes a bit more sense there in that context.
Did the idea of, like... So I actually want to know your opinion on this aspect specifically. Do you think conflict drives a story?
I think that was interesting the way that you mentioned the way that these things are structured, because even talking about the other books that I've recently read in Dragon Riders, it's very true that they're structured very differently from what I am used to in a narrative. They are mostly just like I kind of said earlier, they lack kind of a clear core arc. There a lot of stuff happening, and if there is an arc, it is the rise and fall of this tension. Conflict is a word for it, I think, but I think that I don't think that framework really fully works with the way that the emotions play out. It's not really about a resolution between a conflict and what people want and what other people want and first, second, and third act and whatever. It's more just about, like, a rising sense of, like, dread and unpleasantness and a feeling of kind of like the world is terrible and really bad, and this is just how it's kind of got to be because this is the only way it really could have played out until things start to go better. And by dint of like the people that we're following doing kind of their best with what they're given, slowly the tension begins to go away and is replaced by release. And in that sense, I agree that these are stories that are they definitely have conflict, and there's a lot of conflict in them, but they don't conflict centric. Like
I just don't feel like the conflict drives these stories.
Yeah, they're not conflict driven. They're not built around that conflict. It is not something that is like worshiping at the altar of conflict at the core of storytelling, like so much of Western writing is taught to. That's not even like a universal thing. Like, let's talk about 4-act structure.
I know it's not a universal thing, but it's something that's been driven home so much. And like, at least in my personal classes, like I said, when I was in middle school or high school, I was literally told by one of my English teachers, you can never have a story without conflict, or otherwise it's not a story worth telling.
Whatever. Whatever,
and
my guy.
I get what they were trying to do, because they were dealing with a bunch of young kids who were writing about playing with their dog instead of something that could actually be made into a longer story. So I understand what they were trying to do, but I feel like these stories kind of fundamentally prove them incorrect.
Like, there's definitely ways to like communicate like fictitious things happening and tell a story in a way that is interesting and satisfying that also isn't built around that particular framework. And like, it's good. They're good at them. McCaffrey's a solid writer.
I do feel like it would be very difficult for a lot of like American authors, at least, to write in that way.
Yeah, I definitely think so. Especially, you know, American science fiction authors in the 1970s. Well, actually, you know, a lot
Anne
of
McCaffrey is Irish.
Really? She's Irish? I thought she was American.
Okay, so I started recently doing a project on the first book. And I looked it up, and yeah, she's an American-Irish writer. She moved, I'm pretty sure she was born in Ireland, and then she later moved to America.
Flip it.
It was the other way around?
Yeah.
Born in America and then moved to Ireland?
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's an American-Irish writer, and I thought that was really interesting because these books were coming out during a time when, like, there were a lot of feminist movements happening in Ireland.
Oh.
And, like, so that's just been, like, putting these stories in a whole new light for me.
That makes a lot of sense.
Because before I thought she was just giving in to the misogynistic tropes of women hate other women, and that's all they do. And then after reading about, like, the movements that were happening in Ireland in the 70s to, like, confront misogyny, it kind of felt like she was being more purposeful with the writing after reading about that.
Fascinating.
So that kind of caused me to have like it caused me to reflect on what I earlier thought about how she was writing. And again, she makes mistakes, and I don't agree with the way she handles gender in all aspects in these books. But I am willing to be a little less, well, that was just fucking horrible. Like I initially wanted to be with all of the female characters in the second book.
It's definitely, the fanfickiness comes out a bit harder with the characters.
It comes out a bit hard with Shara too in this one, because she doesn't come across as very interesting to me, and it feels like she's just there to be another reason why Pimer stays in the South.
You know what Shara is? She's that girl at the end of Disney's The Jungle Book that just shows up, sings a song, gets some water, and then Mowgli's like, "Oh wow, a lady. Maybe I'll just follow the lady."
In the second movie, he lives with her.
I remember there being a second movie where she has like a personality.
Yeah, he lives with her and her little brother.
Isn't she just like a nagging, horrible, like...
So, I don't think so. That's not how I saw her. But then again, I was a little kid watching these movies really excited to have a female character who wasn't automatically going to end up marrying the main character at the end. So, I don't know. It felt like she was the burdened older sister who was stuck trying to keep Mowgli and her baby brother out of trouble, and yet the two just wanted to ruin her day. That's why she came off as so nagging, in my opinion, because she's the one who's literally was told she would be in trouble if they go out there. And,
which is a fascinating
and they go out there anyways. They do not give a damn.
I think that there's definitely something to be said about the writers who were like, oh yes, this character that was supposed to be enticing and lure him into humanity. I think that part of why he wants to leave is because she becomes his nagging metaphorical wife.
And that's fair, but also, like, she has a reason to be like that. She's gonna get in trouble if they don't listen.
Fair, that's fair.
And if you're gonna be the one punished for what this random kid who followed you from the from the jungle decided to do, I would nag his ass too. Fuck.
Shara is a bit more of an active player.
He's running off with her 3-year-old brother.
Shara is a bit more of an active player and less of an eye candy. But she's very two-dimensional. You know, I don't think she really, I think she shows up again a bit in White Dragon, but I don't think her dimensionality ever really improves
so much. Because that's another thing, and this is, I know I've been complimenting Emma Catherie's writing a lot, and again, I don't think she's perfect, but I do think there's a couple things she does really strong that are worth talking about. And another one is showing how even good people have bad sides and bad reactions to things, and they aren't perfect. And that was something like, Atticus. You know the book with the lawyer
yes,
Atticus.
I've not read the other book that kind of sort of got released maybe without her full consent.
Yes. Okay. So, what is it called? Because it's blanking my mind.
To catch a Watchman or something?
No. The first one.
Oh, To Kill a Mockingbird.
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Not Go Set a Watchman?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to touch on that too. So, in the second book of that series, it's shown that Atticus is racist. And that when he was protecting the black man during the trial, it's because it was his job as a lawyer, not because he actually thought the guy was innocent. And so a lot of people have an issue with that, because Atticus is no longer this really great white savior. He's a three-dimensional character who has bigotry, even though his daughter was learning a lesson to not be a bigot. And I feel like for a lot of people, that would have seemed kind of obvious if you paid any attention to what was happening in the first book. But a lot of people had an issue with that coming out in the second one. And there are issues with the second one being maybe released without her full consent and everything like that. I would not advocate paying full price from a Barnes & Noble store for that book. If you want to read it, go to a library. Then you don't have to spend any money and you can figure out what I'm talking about. But it kind of feels like Anne McCaffrey does a lot of that in these ones. And especially in the first one, I know I keep bringing up the other two, and I should be able to pull examples from there. Robinson in here, we see more sides to than Robinson in the end of the first book.
Yeah.
And we get to see how horrible he's willing to be, but also how he justifies the horrible acts he does. But in the first book, when Jax and Ruth bond, everybody who treated Minley so wonderfully and welcoming immediately turned on him and saw him as a threat and were horrible to him in those few moments. So much so that Minley was terrified they were going to be horrible to her if she fucked up. And something that was beyond her control, like that was beyond like Jack's and Ruth's control. Well, I'm assuming it was beyond their control. I don't understand how the bonding works, okay? It makes no fucking sense. Anyways, moving on. There's a lot of moments where even Pimer is shown to be horrible, but gets to have good moments as well. So all the characters feel pretty three-dimensional, where even when they're not misogynistic, they have misogynistic tendencies, like Pimer does when talking to Minley in the second book, and stuff like that. So I find that to be really interesting and compelling. I feel like her writing's really strong with that.
Yeah.
I feel like that's one of the two very strong aspects of her writing that really compels me to keep reading her books. Sorry, I know we've gone over time, and that was a long ass rant.
So I think that works as a pretty effective newbie review, though, on the whole, of just like this episode of this whole sequence of working with her writing.
Yeah, and I like how we talked less about Pimer's journey and more about like how the writing seems to work as a whole, because it kind of feels like this whole book was to wrap up a few different stories as a whole rather than to just focus on Pimer.
There's definitely a lot of utilitarian stuff happening here. I think that a lot of this was also putting pieces in where she wanted them to be for White Dragon.
Yeah.
Which, like, if you look at the timeline of publishing order, White Dragon took a lot longer to make than just about, like, any book except the first one. Like, at least of these initial first 6. Like, there's a several year gap between Dragondrums and Dragon Quest, which are the last, Harper Hall book, obviously, and also the last mainline book before White Dragon, which I think doesn't come out until a little over a decade after the very first Pern book kind of dropped. It's very clearly she had some plans she wanted to get in order.
I cannot wait until we get to that. I cannot explain how much I want to read so much about Ruth and Jax and Lessa, specifically those 3 characters. I want to know so much about them.
Ruth, the asexual, aromantic, probably agender dragon, like, has a lot going on.
I want to read that story so much.
It is very... There's a lot going on there.
But I also don't know what else we have to read before we can get to that one, because I don't know shit about this world. That's why the politics escaped me.
It's like with this trilogy, the first one is really harsh and terrible, and nobody really seems like altogether good. Imagine a less soft version of what we went through.
I should expect that. Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's about Lessa, and it's fun to be around Lessa. Well, it comes to be fun to be around Lessa. Mostly everybody's got a lot of baggage coming into the first one. There's a lot of chips and revenges, and it's kind of Game of Thronesy actually at the start. Actually, it's really Game of Thronesy at the start.
Basically, if you want to figure out how to write well-rounded, somewhat horrible characters without coming off as a horrible person who condones everything, read the Dragon Riders of Pern books. I feel like it's a good lesson of what to do and what not to do at the same time.
There are there are definitely some failings when we get to kind of...
I'm sure everything with Ruth is going to be kind of, but I really want to read that.
The second book has kind of her worst female character, period, which is the other, like, queen rider whose other dragon gets into the big fight.
Oh, see, that feels like it plays right back into the stereotype of 2 powerful women can't be friends.
Oh, it's even worse. It's so much worse than that. It's so much worse. The reason she gets into the fight is because she's sleeping around. Because she's a horrible, no good, dirty blonde.
I hate that. I hate that.
But that is a book. That is a book for another episode, probably in the winter. at the soonest.
At the fucking soonest.
Maybe we save this for another summer. Maybe we do a Dragon Summer next year.
We'll do another Dragon Summer next year. We'll probably touch on it then.
In the interim, I really enjoy the Dragon Rider books. They make me want to read other Anne McCaffrey. They make me want to read other like contemporary stuff by like writers from similar backgrounds, just so I can see how much was extraordinary, how much was just she got really popular, and just see what else is like this, what else is similar, because I feel kind of like the guy that's only seen Boss Baby watching a second movie. But it's good and I enjoy it, and like we said, it's like a warm cookie. You've not seen that popular tweet, the guy that's only seen Boss Baby watching a second movie, getting a lot of Boss Baby vibes. It's a very popular tweet used to summarize, people with strong opinions about things that they don't really understand. I relate to it a lot a lot of times.
I have no idea what you're talking about, but you should send it to me on Twitter later.
I've just read it basically verbatim 3 times.
Oh, that's literally it?
That's just the tweet. Okay. It is just somebody like doing a drill type tweet. Okay. I said it really fast, so maybe the podcast listeners won't have caught it, and we'll have to like Google Boss Baby tweet and maybe see it for themselves. I'm gonna Google it
after this.
Do it.
Is it that they've only seen the movie Boss Baby, so everything else kind of seems like it's similar to Boss Baby?
Yeah, that's just the point of the tweet.
Okay. I feel like I understand it now.
That's the joke. That is the sum total of the joke.
I'm sorry. I have to double check with these things sometimes.
I also input a justification for why I was explaining it poorly and really rapidly and why you wouldn't understand it. My podcast voice is suboptimal because I forget that I'm going to have to come back and edit this later, and that it needs to sound good and like something that won't make me want to tear my ears out when I'm listening to it and editing it.
So next week is going to be our casual play a video game, talk about stuff week. And I want to put a pin in the topic for that gaming session in the future. And that is specifically dragon books with dragon eggs, how they find dragon riders. Because I really want to talk more about that with you.
Okay, we'll talk about it. We can get into the horrible, no good, very bad system of finding dragon riders at the start of Dragonflight. It's so bad. It's so bad, it hurts.
Anyways, have a nice night, everybody.
I have been Noah.
And I have been Tigereyes 45, your newbie.
I was the host. I certainly hosted. You have finally caught Dragondrums by Anne McCaffrey.
I would recommend it for people who have read the other Dragon Riders of Pern books and have read Minalese first. This is not just the one you randomly jump into.
Unless you're a rad lad that likes to like not know what's going on, in which case we salute you and your ladisness.
Good luck.
Good luck and have a good time. Seriously. See you around. The long month of dragons is over. We've slain the beast at long last.
The month has been over. We just put this book on the back burner.
It's finally over. We thought we had vanquished it. It came back from the dead, but we finally cut it off. We've killed it. We've cut the head off. We're going back home. It's great, but it did bite us with its poison, and we are going to die.
Aw, Draco. We're going to go down like him.
We got Beowulfed. We got total Beowulfed, I'm afraid. Super Beowulfed, I'm afraid. I'm sorry, guys. We're Beowulfed. No more podcast. See you next week.
See you next week.
You've been listening to You Didn't Catch That. If you enjoyed the show and would like to help us against our never-ending battle against the demon known as the algorithm, be sure to like, share, and subscribe or follow on whatever platform you happen to be listening to the show on. Our intro and outro music are by Amiga Deluxe, and you can find links to both tracks in the description. If you'd like to see our faces, and who could blame you, you can find video versions of just about every single one of our episodes on our YouTube channel. There's a link in the description. And if you'd like to catch the latest episodes as they're happening, we live stream all of our new episodes on Twitch. You can find links to both of our channels in the description. It came out a bit later than anticipated, but you're listening to the season 1 finale. And there are more episodes coming, don't you worry. I just need to finish editing them, my goodness. I say this at the end of every episode, but I really mean it this time. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. I hope you listen to more. Take care.